In the twilight of European history, few figures have been as misunderstood, romanticized, and at times caricatured as Joanna I of Castile, known to posterity as Joanna the Mad. Her life, a whirlwind of power, tragedy, and rumors, has been the subject of speculation for centuries. But the title of this narrative, The Queen Who Gave Birth to a Monster, does not refer to a grotesque creature of flesh and blood, but to a cursed legacy, a heritage of madness, ambition, and betrayals that marked not only her life but that of her descendants and, ultimately, the fate of Europe. There are no dragons or nightmarish creatures here, but rather a human, complex, and at times absurdly tragic tale, where politics, family, and the mind intertwine in an impossible knot to untangle. Joanna was born on November 6, 1479, in Toledo, in the heart of a Castile still pulsing with the fervor of the Reconquista. She was the third child of the Catholic Monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, a couple who not only united two kingdoms but laid the foundations for what would become modern Spain. Imagine being third in line in a royal family. Not the direct heir, but not far enough removed to escape responsibilities. Joanna grew up in an environment where faith, duty, and politics were daily bread. Her parents were, in their own way, medieval marketing geniuses. They unified kingdoms, expelled the Moors from Granada, funded a certain Columbus to get lost in the Atlantic, and ensured their children were key pieces in Europe's diplomatic chessboard. Joanna was no ordinary princess. From a young age, she displayed sharp intelligence, spoke several languages, and had an enviable education for her time. She studied Latin, philosophy, history, and, as a true daughter of Isabella, was steeped in fervent Catholicism. But she wasn't the typical prodigy reciting verses to impress courtiers. There was something about her, a spark of intensity, a reserved yet passionate character, that already raised eyebrows. Was it a sign of what was to come? Perhaps. But at the time, no one could foresee the storm that was brewing. At 17, Joanna was sent to Flanders to marry Philip of Habsburg, known as Philip the Handsome. Yes, the nickname wasn't just empty flattery. Chronicles of the time describe him as a man of almost insulting beauty, with golden hair, clear eyes, and a charisma that made court ladies swoon and men want to be his friend. But Philip was more than just a pretty face. He was the heir to a family that controlled half of Europe, the Habsburgs, and his marriage to Joanna was part of a master plan to weave a web of alliances to keep France, everyone's perennial headache, in check. Joanna's journey to Flanders was no walk in the park. Crossing Europe in the 15th century was like playing Russian roulette with ships and muddy roads. But when she arrived in Ghent and met Philip, something clicked, or rather, exploded. Chronicles say the two were so smitten with each other that they moved up the wedding because, well, they couldn't wait. This is where the story starts to get juicy. Joanna fell head over heels in love with Philip, and he, at least initially, seemed to reciprocate. But love, as we all know, is slippery terrain, especially when mixed with politics, power, and a husband who seemed to have a magnet for extramarital adventures. Flanders was a world apart from Castile. The Flemish court was a cauldron of luxury, parties, and debauchery, a stark contrast to the sobriety and religious fervor of Isabella and Ferdinand's court. Joanna, raised in an environment where duty came first, found herself in a place where rules were more flexible. Philip, meanwhile, was hardly a model of fidelity. While Joanna devoted herself to being a dutiful wife and bearing him children, 6 to be exact, all of whom survived, a feat in an era where infant mortality was as common as a cold, Philip entertained himself with other ladies of the court. And this is where the rumors about Joanna's madness begin to take shape. They say Joanna was jealous, possessive, even obsessive. Chronicles tell of her confronting Philip's mistresses, cutting one's hair, or causing scenes that left the court agape. Was this madness, or simply a young woman, deeply in love, grappling with a husband who couldn't keep his promises? In the 15th century, a woman showing intense emotions risked being labeled unstable. Add to that the fact that Joanna was far from her family, in a foreign court where she wasn't always welcome, and under pressure to be the mother of future kings, and it's not hard to see why her reactions might seem exaggerated. But the real turning point came in 1504, when Isabella the Catholic died. Joanna, until then merely the wife of an archduke, became the heir to the throne of Castile. This was no small matter. Castile was a powerhouse, with an army, a treasury, and a foothold in the New World thanks to Columbus. Suddenly, Joanna and Philip became major players on the European stage. But here's where things get complicated. Philip wasn't content to be a consort, a mere companion to his wife. He wanted power for himself. And Ferdinand, Joanna's father, wasn't exactly thrilled about a Habsburg taking control of his beloved Castile. What followed was a power struggle that would put any soap opera to shame. Ferdinand, a master of political intrigue, began maneuvering to maintain control. Philip, for his part, started spreading rumors that Joanna was not in her right mind, a convenient strategy to justify why he should rule in her place. And Joanna, caught in the middle, began showing signs of what we might now interpret as deep depression or an emotional breakdown. It didn't help that in 1506, Philip died suddenly at 28, possibly of typhoid fever, though some whispered about poison. This is where the legend of Joanna the Mad reaches its climax. Philip's death shattered Joanna. Stories claim she refused to part with his body, traveled with his coffin through Castile, opened the casket to gaze at her husband, and spoke to him as if he were still alive. Sounds like madness, right? But let's put ourselves in her shoes for a moment. Joanna had lost the man she loved, was alone in a kingdom that didn't understand her, surrounded by nobles plotting behind her back, and with a father and son eyeing her throne as a prize to claim. Was it madness or desperation? Was it love or an attempt to cling to the only thing that gave her life meaning in a crumbling world? Ferdinand, ever the pragmatist, seized the opportunity. He declared Joanna unfit to rule and confined her to Tordesillas, a palace that was more prison than home. There she spent the last 46 years of her life, from 1509 until her death in 1555. During that time, her son, Charles V, inherited not only Castile and Aragon but also the Holy Roman Empire, becoming one of the most powerful men in history. But while Charles conquered Europe, Joanna languished in Tordesillas, isolated, watched, and, according to some, mistreated. Chronicles speak of a woman who sometimes screamed, refused to eat, and sank into long silences. Was this proof of her madness, or the result of decades of confinement, betrayal, and loss? Now, let's talk about the cursed legacy. Joanna didn't give birth to a physical monster, but her legacy was marked by tragedy. Her 6 children survived, a rarity for the time, and all held positions of power. Charles V, her eldest, was Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and King of Spain, a man whose ambition and responsibilities pushed him to the brink of collapse. Her youngest daughter, Catherine, became Queen of Portugal. But the true monster wasn't her children, but the burden they inherited, a vast, ungovernable empire plagued by religious conflicts, wars, and rivalries. Charles V, for instance, spent his life battling Protestants, Ottomans, and the French, only to abdicate exhausted and retire to a monastery. The Habsburg dynasty, which Joanna helped solidify, dominated Europe for centuries, but at a steep cost. Intrigue, consanguineous marriages, and an obsession with power that eventually led to their ruin. And then there's the issue of madness itself. The label Joanna the Mad wasn't just a political weapon used by Philip and Ferdinand. It became a shadow that haunted her descendants. The Habsburgs had a reputation for mental instability, partly because marriages between cousins and uncles weren't exactly a recipe for genetic health. Charles II of Spain, the last Spanish Habsburg, born nearly a century after Joanna's death, was a tragic example. Sickly, frail, and, according to some, unfit to rule. Was this Joanna's curse? Probably not. It was more the result of dynastic politics that prioritized power over biology. But history, ever eager for juicy narratives, couldn't resist connecting the dots. Back to Joanna in Tordesillas. Her confinement wasn't just physical but narrative. History turned her into a symbol, a tragic figure embodying obsessive love, madness, and the fragility of women in power. But this image is unfair. Joanna wasn't a weak queen. She had shown strength in confronting her husband and father, insisting on her right to rule. Even in Tordesillas, there were moments when she refused to sign documents that would strip her son of his inheritance, proving that, even in isolation, she remained aware of her role as queen. What if her madness was just a convenient label, a way to neutralize a woman who, in a male-dominated world, refused to be a mere puppet? The court of Tordesillas, where Joanna spent her final years, was a microcosm of intrigue. Her guardians, often nobles loyal to Ferdinand or Charles, had strict orders to keep her under control. But letters and testimonies from the time suggest Joanna wasn't always lost in dementia. She spoke clearly at times, received visitors, though few, and maintained an interest in her children's affairs. It's even said that when the Comuneros, a group of Castilian rebels, tried to free her in 1520 to lead their cause, Joanna refused to join them, not out of madness, but because she didn't want to betray her son Charles. This act, more than any other, suggests Joanna remained a queen, aware of her duty, even in the worst circumstances. Joanna the Mad story isn't just about a woman trapped by circumstances, but about an era when women in power were viewed with suspicion. Isabella the Catholic, her mother, had managed to rule with an iron hand, but even she had to fight the prejudices of her time. Joanna, less pragmatic, more emotional, wasn't so lucky. Her story forces us to ask, what is madness in a world that doesn't tolerate vulnerability? Was Joanna mad, or simply human in an inhumane environment? Joanna's legacy, the cursed inheritance, isn't limited to the Habsburgs or Spain. Her life is a reminder of how power can distort human relationships, how labels can become chains, and how history, written by the victors, can erase the truth of the vanquished. Her children, especially Charles V, took the Spanish Empire to its zenith but also sowed the seeds of its decline. The wars, debts, and religious divisions that marked the Habsburg reign can be traced, in part, to decisions made during Joanna's life. And though she had little control over many of those decisions, her role as the mother of a dynasty and Queen of Castile places her at the heart of this historical storm.